You know you want to. Come on. You know you want to. Come on. Just do it.
To wrestle with some of the somber implications arising out of the abduction phenomenon and its impact on millions of individual lives, this is Neon Galactic. I'm James Falk. Thanks for joining us, and please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to this channel so we can keep on keeping on in the face of such existential mystery. We've entertained on this channel a broad spectrum of beliefs and assumptions around the UFO phenomenon, from the physical to the symbolic, the spiritual to the scientific, the transcendent down to the ontologically horrifying. Today we interview a man who has done decades of copious research and lived a life in unpredictable contact with that very phenomenon, and his conclusions should give us pause. Author, researcher, and abductee Steve Aspin has spent the better part of the last 20 years working to figure out the phenomenon that has so perniciously shaped his whole life and seems to have shaped the lives of several generations on his mother's side. Importantly, his experiences aren't love and light. Yet they are very much at the core of what apparently millions have experienced, knowingly or not. And it's vitally important that we hear the message now and understand those implications if we're going to be prepared for what's coming. Aspin's first book, Out of Time, is a startling and important volume that offers up his story, his research, and his conclusions about the nature of this ongoing contact. His new book, co-written with Dr. Andreas Luke, is investigating the impossible. Biology offers new answers and insights. It's due out shortly, and it wrestles with the very real science being done to ascertain the validity of the Nazca mummies, as well as the alien hair recovered as part of the Peter Curry case. The book also examines the biological likelihood of alien/human hybridity and offers a primer for folks on dealing with online misinformation, much needed these days. Today, though, we're focusing on Aspin's experiences, his conclusions surrounding the abduction phenomenon, the likely mission of its perpetrators, and why he's convinced that the extraterrestrial hypothesis remains by far the most reasonable explanation for what we're encountering. It's an honor to have Steve Aspin on the show. Welcome, sir.
Hi, James. Thank you for your invitation. Thank you for having me on.
No problem. I feel like that I've been doing this show for a couple of years, and if there's anything that I've undercovered, I think, is the abduction phenomenon and also how that relates to the extraterrestrial hypothesis. I do a lot of time sort of talking about the philosophical implications and how it relates to archetypes and those sorts of things. But there's a very real and very ugly phenomenon that's gone on for a lot of years where people get hurt as a result of these abductions. And reading your book reminded me that I've neglected that part of the conversation, and it's something that we have to, internalize and understand if we're ever really going to make progress on what all this, portends for the human species. So let's start with sort of establishing, your bona fides. Who is Steve Aspin, and how did you get into this subject of UFOs and then abductions?
Well, I've had what most people would think of as anomalous experiences since I was a child, and many abductees go through childhood and have strange events happen to them. Um, Nighttime abductions where they feel paralyzed and they find themselves in a strange environment, being manipulated and moved, and they describe the creatures that abduct them as having a certain smell, and sometimes they don't see them very clearly because they're on their back facing upwards to the ceiling of whatever enclosure they're in, but
Yeah.
they kind of smell and sense them around them, and they talk to you in your brain, in your mind sometimes, telepathically, and you think that they're talking to you, but there's no vocal sound. You don't hear anything, and you discover you can sort of talk back to them just by framing the words and kind of speaking in your mind, and they understand you.
Mhm.
And I never understood these experiences as a child. And I was pretty sure my friends and the kids I knocked around with and the kids at school and so forth didn't undergo these experiences. And how do you even start that conversation? With most
Yeah.
people, as a child, you just can't start it.
Yeah.
Um, when I was 7 years old, no, a little older than that. When I was 10 years old, maybe just 11, but probably 10 years old. In 1966 or 67, I was undergoing one of these events where they probe you and they sometimes use needles and they put things in your ears and so forth. And I never really understood what was going on. And I asked one of these creatures mentally in my mind, because as I said, the communication is all telepathically. You don't hear any sound. Why why am I singled out for this particular honor, this particular process? Because I was pretty sure my school friends didn't go through this.
Yeah.
And he said to me, he had his back to me, I remember, they've got huge, great heads and scrawny bodies. And he had his back to me and said, it's because of your mother and your grandmother and your great grandmother and you're next. And that I could make no sense of at the time at all. I mean, I half forgot it, but I never really forgot it. And that stuck in my mind for decades after that, before I really worked out this was to do with the alien abduction phenomenon.
Yeah.
So he told me in 1967 that this was an intergenerational phenomenon. And the reason why I was undergoing it was because my mother, her mother, and her mother had also undergone it. And this was something to do with the genetic line. Now, I always had a deep feeling that it was possibly something about that, but I didn't really know why. But that particular interchange, exchange, lived with me for decades, and I used it as the governing theme for Out of Time. It's not the only thing in that book, as of course, if
Yeah.
you've read it, you realize it contains a lot more than that. But that's uh, the underlying pattern of the abduction phenomenon. The reason why abductees are in what I call the program,
Yeah.
because it's a program where they work down generations, and we can go into that in several directions, but that's the core of it. That's the bare bones of it.
Yeah.
And throughout my adult life, I kept having the anomalous experiences. They change a little bit. Certainly after adolescence, they change because there's a breeding element. They start when start being you go through puberty, and
Mhm.
they never leave you alone with that. That's a very, very important part of the abduction program. Um, so I always knew that these things were somehow connected, and I kind of pushed it away because I carved out a professional life in the business world, and I was involved with medical diagnostics and surgical innovation products for many, many years. And I started and ran a £1 million company, which was very successful in Southeast England. I worked hard at that for 20 years, and all that time I pushed this thing away. And then in 2007, I had an experience while visiting a supplier in a hotel room in Sardinia, which is a big island in the Mediterranean off the west coast of Italy. We were staying in a place called Bosa off the west coast, and we were supposed to get up very early in the morning because my colleague I had to take my colleague back to the airport so he could get his flight back to Amsterdam, because he was a Dutch guy. And I was with my girlfriend at the time. She was with her for a few years. She was in the same room, obviously. And I woke up and I looked at the clock, and it was 7:30, and all of us had agreed to wake up at 7 o'clock so that we could leave and go to the airport and get my colleague to the airport on time. So we're already overslept by half an hour, all of us. He was in a different part of the hotel, my colleague. But in the room were two classic grey aliens. There's the bullheads, gigantic almond-shaped black eyes. Everybody knows what these creatures look like because so many people have described them.
Yeah.
And they were scrawny, and one of them had a thing in its right hand, like a very long letter H thing, about the diameter, the kind of the wire was like the diameter of maybe a car aerial from the 1970s with a telescopic car aerial. Do you remember those things?
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe you don't remember it, but it was about that size, and it was like a long letter H. So the two very tall things about the same size as he was, and they were connected across the middle with a bar like an H. And he had that in his right hand, and there was one on his other side that I don't remember anything in his hand. And between the two was my father, who had died 3 years earlier, um, and he said to me this thing. The whole thing was in Technicolor, really bright, visually stunning image. And he said to me, and I was awake, sitting up in bed, on top of the bed, because somehow I'd ended up on the top of the bedclothes. And he said to me, "It's time to go, Steve." And suddenly the scene faded and it became misty, and there was a kind of shimmer, and they faded out, and they left just this big oval shaped cloud in the room, like a big oval. And I put this down to, because I was awake, fully awake when this happened. Those creatures were in the hotel room with us, physically
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
I put this down to a kind of visitation from the other world, because my dad had recently died, and I thought maybe he was coming back to say hi, everything's okay, or
Yeah.
something like that. And it never occurred to me that this was a kind of alien abduction. However, I was really puzzled by these creatures that looked really ugly. This skinny little, with these skinny little bodies, and these skinny little arms, and these great big bulbous heads, and these fantastically huge black eyes
Hmm.
staring at me. And um, I just could make no sense of that. It didn't fit together. The whole thing just didn't fit together. It wasn't an angelic vision, or particularly, they weren't angels or anything. They were just these ugly creatures. And my dad was there between them. And during the next year or so, I kind of worked. I'd read Whitley's Communion several years earlier, and I'd become familiar with the alien abduction theme in the way that people, you see things on late night television. This was like 20 years ago, so we had cable TV or satellite TV. The internet was fairly young then compared to what it is now, but
Yeah.
but there were documentary series on the alien abduction theme and so forth. And I'd come across an interview with John Mack, um, who, when he published one of his books, I think it's probably Passport to the Cosmos, on BBC Radio 4. So it was audio only, and I listened to him describing the abductees he'd met and worked with, and I knew that this was a thing somehow. Particularly after reading Communion, that striking cover image painted by Ted Seth Jacobs under Whitley's direction was so arresting, in the bookshops all over town. Um, I knew that this was a thing. This was real. This wasn't something some kind of fantasy. I knew that it was a thing, and had been so grateful that it was nothing to do with me, even though even though was convinced that it was a thing, that it was a real thing. And I'd
Yeah.
had very little curiosity about the abduction thing. But during the year following this event in this hotel room in Bosa, I'd kind of worked out, all these things that happened to my mother, and things she'd said to me, and something that happened to me when I was 16 that I never understood. We can talk about that if you like, but it forms the prologue of Out of Time.
Yeah.
It's a particular incident, a very striking incident involving a daytime abduction and a vivid memory. And I worked out that I actually might be involved in this somehow, and I was very miserable about it, very, very depressed that if it was the case, I really didn't want anything to do with it. And, I was kind of forced to confront this and basically dive into the subject.
Yeah.
So, do you want to
That was
ask anything about this?
Yeah, no,
Or
that was
I
the
don't want to talk
huge.
all the time. So,
No, that's good. I mean, you had this turning point, it sounds like, where you were finally forced to confront that you had
yeah,
had these experiences pass through your life. I mean,
yeah,
earlier you mentioned that you had spoken with a creature who had told you that it was because of your mother and your
yeah.
your grandmother and your great grandmother that was the reason.
Mm.
How did that process, I mean, for you unfold where you initially recognized that this thing had been going on in your life, but then you were also able to sort of recover some experiences and then from those kind of start to build your own perspective on what's going on?
Well, James, the thing is that the whole alien abduction thing is so improbable,
Yeah.
against everything else we come up with in our lives, against anything that the science we're taught, that how the universe works, and the we all have jobs and careers, and we throw ourselves into our professions for a few years, and sometimes ease off when we got a little more leisure time and engage with things like this. Um, so because it was so improbable, I was very reluctant to admit that it might be happening to me. But there's so many things, like a couple of things I've described. There was something that happened to me when I was 16. If you read the book, and if
Yeah,
any of
no, yeah, it's absolutely striking how you were basically
yeah,
you had you were working 6 days a week at a place that was
Mhm.
sort of doing flower growth, right? I mean, that's kind of a
Oh,
stupid
this was
way
when I
to
was
put it,
16.
but
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
yeah. And
yeah,
then you had a compulsion on your one
yeah,
day off to get up early and go to this abandoned house or a house that was in the middle of construction and
yeah.
had a very vivid sighting of UFO. I mean, but then
Yeah,
you were, go ahead.
I worked 6 days a week. The only day I didn't work was Saturday. And Saturday morning, I used to lie in bed, because teenagers, I was 16. That's what they
Yeah.
do.
Well, surprising that you'd
Um,
work 6 days a week at that age, honestly.
and it was a very physical job as well.
Yeah.
So I had this, it was a Thursday, the 20th of July, 1972. And I had this, in the evening, I had this um, very bizarre compulsion, just knowing that I was to get up on Saturday morning very early and to go somewhere. And I knew that I would get up and go somewhere, and I didn't know where it was. But on Saturday morning, I knew that I would know. And this is again a very, very peculiar thing to tell people. But
Yeah.
you live in these worlds, when this happens to you. So I woke up on Saturday morning at 5:45 in the morning, and got on my clothes and went out of the house. It was summer, and it was quite warm and sunny, and the sun was up at that time in the morning. And I walked. We lived in a suburban area near a market town, and I walked. It was about maybe almost a mile away from where we were living, and there was fields and agriculture around this area, and then there was another little settlement of new houses being built. No, none of them were inhabited. None of them were lived in at that time, but they were all under construction. So it was a building site with the shells of the houses, the roof timbers, and so forth, and no windows, no glass in the windows, just rectangular holes in the walls where the windows were going to be fitted. And
Yeah.
cement was on the piles of cement were on the ground, and some of the floors were concreted and so forth. There was construction.
Mhm.
Um, so I wandered into one of these houses and I thought, what am I doing here? What now? And suddenly I looked at my watch, and it was 8:15. So 2 hours and 15 minutes had just gone just like that. From 1 second to the next, 2 hours and 15 minutes had disappeared. And I was surrounded by a pulsating blue and indigo lights that can kind of made this whoosh, whoosh, whooshing sound in my ears. And I felt kind of disorientated and slightly dizzy. And I heard a voice very, very clearly in my head, close by me. I had an impression that the the who the person communicating with me, speaking to me, was behind me. I didn't actually see him or her, but I
Okay.
had a very clear knowing that this somebody was speaking to me. And the voice just said, "You're not going to remember anything about this. You're just going to forget the whole thing." And it wasn't kind of an instruction, like a hypnotist would do, like, you
Yeah.
will not remember. It was just a statement of fact. It was
Yeah.
just a statement of fact. And he probably didn't have to say that, but he just chose to impart that information to me and say, don't worry, you're not going to remember any of this. And these pulsating lights and the beeping and the noises and the time displacement. And I looked through this rectangular aperture in the wall where a window was going to be fitted, and there's no glass in the window at the time. And I saw a flying saucer about 100 meters away, and it was about 30 meters from the ground, and convert meters to yards because it's almost the same.
Yeah.
It's at an angle 30 meters altitude and about 100 meters away. So it was it was at an angle like that, and it was traveling across my vision from left to right very, really slowly. And it looked like it was, I say in the book, it looked like it was out of time because it didn't look like it belonged in this dimension somehow. It looked like it was part of something else, and I was
Yeah.
seeing through into some extra. It's very, very difficult to explain. When I was 16 in 1972, I had no words for it, but um, and all of a sudden everything stopped, and I was just alone in the house looking around. The UFO had gone, the lights had gone, the sound in my ears had gone. Uh, all the dizziness and disorientation disappeared. And I just thought, oh, it's time to go home now. So as I was walking home, I felt this part of my face, this under the cheekbone, was wet. And I thought, oh, I just wiped it away, and it's wet, it's continued to be wet. And when I got home, I looked in the mirror, at the bathroom mirror, and there was a disc of bright red, a burn, like the skin had been burned off, just under my eye socket, and it was the size of a large coin. I don't think you've got any coins in the United States of the size of this one, but it was maybe that much in diameter, so it's quite big.
Yeah.
Um, we've had coins of that size in Europe, a lot for a long time, um, in our money. Yes, it's maybe a bit smaller than that. Yes, the
Okay,
coin in the
cool.
middle, it's about that size. What's that?
Yeah, interesting. This is a dollar coin, a silver dollar
Yeah,
from 1945.
yeah.
Liberty. Yeah, Lady Liberty.
It was exactly
Oddly
like
enough.
that, but it was
Yeah.
it was a disc under here, and it wouldn't stop weeping for about 2 hours, and then finally it did, and it scabbed over for several weeks. And when people asked me what it was, I just didn't know what to say to them,
Yeah.
because the last thing you want to do is start describing a flying saucer which you encountered at 7 o'clock in the morning or 6 o'clock in the morning in on a building site, and this weird thing happened to you, and you ended up with a burn on your cheek. My mother, my dad, and certainly would have taken me off to the child psychiatrist, because you don't
Definitely.
those sort of things don't happen to kids.
Yeah, no, yeah.
So that stayed with me for decades, and I never really understood what it was. And believe it or not, when I came across the alien abduction narrative initially, I didn't really connect it, and then I've began to think maybe that thing that happened to me in 1972, maybe that was to do with this, but I didn't have such a clear recollection of anything except that one incident. Apart from this event in Bosa, where these two aliens, with my dad between them, appeared in the hotel room, and so I just started to. My mother, unfortunately, had died by then, so
So you
I
couldn't
couldn't
talk to
talk to them
her.
about it.
Yeah.
But
But you'd had a
she had.
conversation with your grandmother at one point, didn't
Yeah, I
you?
did. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I did. Yeah, she died at 60 of a heart attack, so
Oh, I'm
she
sorry.
was very relatively young, but she died in about the year following this encounter I had in my I say my sleep because it started off with me sleeping. But when I asked this entity, why me? Why am I privileged to undergo all these things? What is it about me that makes me special? And I'm pretty sure that I'm not the only one. Um, but I don't think it happens to everybody. So what's the deal? And when he said, it's your mother and your grandmother and your great grandmother and you're next. Um, so the next time I met my grandmother after this incident, when I was maybe 10 or 11, um, she said, I asked her about this because I could talk to her. We're sitting by the fire in the winter. I think it was probably the Christmas holiday, and everybody else had gone out. And I was sitting next to her by a fire. She used to have a rocking chair, and I was in the chair next to her. And she said, "Oh, Stevie, they're just the pixies, but
Mhm.
don't worry, they'll always bring you back." So she had a framing of these experiences that was to do with the fairy world and to do with being taken by fairies. And she'd obviously lived in that paradigm for the whole of her life. And since I discovered from my mother later that when my grandmother was a little girl, she went missing for an entire day. And all the village, she was a York farming community, had asked the fairies if they would please bring her back. And she did appear at sunset walking across the field to the house. And she couldn't explain where she'd been all day. And she had a gash on her between her thumb and first finger, quite a long gash, with like a big scar all her life. And that happened on that day when she was collecting flowers in the fields, when she was like maybe 6 or 7 years old, and the scar never completely faded.
It
So
sounds
she'd have,
similar to, sorry, not to interrupt,
yeah,
but your own experience. You said that you were with friends on a vacation and they didn't want to take you again because at one point you were
yeah,
there and then you weren't, and then they asked you
yeah,
where you
I
were and you're like,
disappeared.
"What do you mean?"
Yeah, that's right. That was happened when I was 11, probably the year after this. Maybe that was the same year my grandmother died. She lived more than 100 miles away from where we lived at the time, so we didn't visit all the time, just on the school holidays.
Yeah.
But that occasion, I was with a male friend, a school friend, and they took me on his parents took us on holiday, took me on holiday with them. Um, so there were those two and their son, my friend, and me, and we were in Norwich. This was a town in the eastern part of England, Norfolk, and I was looking for some aircraft models in a shop, and I just suddenly somebody grabbed me and shook me by the shoulders and said, where have you been? Where have you been? We've been looking for you everywhere. We've been asking you for everybody. Where have you been? And I said, I've never been. What are you talking about? I've not been anywhere. I've just been here the whole time. And nobody would believe me that I've been there the whole time because I much later realized I probably wasn't there the whole time. I'd probably been abducted
Yeah.
and just gone because the entities have such advanced technology that they can abduct people without them being seen.
Yeah.
And they themselves are not seen, and their craft are not seen, and the abductee is not seen. I don't know how they do that, but they do
Yeah,
it.
exactly right. It's
And
almost like in video, you have jump cuts, where you'll splice two pieces of film together where
yeah,
the person in the middle of in the action will kind of
yeah,
jerk around because you don't have a clean edit. That's what they do to people's lives in these moments. It's just like snip,
it's
snip,
exactly
they remove 2 minutes or whatever it is. And
that's exactly what it's like, James. Um,
yeah,
so this was another incident which was just a big, a mystery. I just thought maybe they hadn't seen me.
yeah,
Maybe they some reason, there's a few people about and they just maybe I moved to the next shop or something, or just looked and stood in the doorway and was looking at something, and then maybe they just failed to see me when I was there. That's what I always thought about that
yeah,
factor. But
yeah,
they were determined, all of them, the two parents and the boy were determined that I was not there for an
yeah.
hour, and they assumed, what else could they assume, that I'd wandered off? and was hiding from them and playing some sort of stupid game.
And then lying about
Because
it because afterwards, if you
yeah,
said I
yeah,
didn't go anywhere,
yeah,
it's like, well, we know
yeah,
you did because I was just here looking at
yeah,
you or
yeah.
looking for you.
The relationship cooled a bit after that, and they never took me on a holiday again. And
No,
strange thing is, I'd lost touch with him. It was my age, and by the time I worked out what was going on, what the alien abduction thing is, I mean, I'm not sure if I had talked to him about it, although he would have believed me. I find it credible anyway, but
yeah,
I've no idea where he is now. So
yeah.
it's just one of
It's
those
interesting to
things.
me that your grandmother mentions the pixies, which is
Hmm.
obviously a species of, fey creature or whatever. And there's
Yeah.
a line of argument which you address in your book a little bit about, the Magonia, basically that the
Yeah.
fairy phenomenon is the same as the extraterrestrial phenomenon, just dressed up in, the culture and accoutrements of the present time. But you
Well,
kind of reject that idea. I mean, can
yeah.
you explain why you don't think that that's logically, a sound connection?
Well, we all may be wrong about things.
Of
But
course.
if you're going to um, give something more or less credibility, you just have to work from your experience and the evidence that you see it. And
Yeah.
um, my grandmother, as an example, grew up. She's born in 1908, so she grew up as a child and as a young adult in the 1920s. And she's a teenager in the First World War, and she was in it in the 1920s and 30s. In West Yorkshire in the 1920s and 30s, people didn't have telephones, and there's no TV until the 1950s, and they had a radio set, and the idea of space travel, terrestrial something in people's set of what's believable or you would even think about or talk about. And with a few exceptions, like there was a few science fiction writers like Jules Verne and H.G. Wells and so forth, and a few others, but they were very fringe.
Yeah.
Nobody really gave it much credibility. And farmers in West Yorkshire farming communities really knew nothing about these things. And so the way they cloaked the child disappearance was it's got to be the fairies. What else could it be? It's the fairies.
Yeah.
So she had that paradigm about the abduction program in her. She carried around all her life. She had it until she died, so far as I know. That it was a fairy thing, the pixie thing. That's what it was about.
And they'll always bring you back, right?
They'll always bring you back. Yeah.
Yeah. But you don't think that that works. Is that correct? I mean, in terms of your own.
Well, you're asking if I find fairies abducting people any more credible than aliens.
Yeah, or if it's the
Just-
same thing, maybe just done in different,
yeah,
kind of
and it's the same.
clothing.
That is the abduction program. That's what's going on,
Yeah.
and what the abductors are doing and why, um, and where they're from, of course. Is the source of endless speculation. But what we can see, what we can go from is our experience of this phenomenon, a repeated experience, and those of other people who we talk to and meet who've also undergone it. And you put the pieces together, and there's certain things that you can say with reasonable certainty. And other things are more speculative, and that's what I've tried to do in the book, originally the Out of Time book,
Yeah.
um, because I originally wrote down um, everything that had happened to me up until I realized what was going on, and as a history. And that chapter one is quite a lengthy chapter, maybe almost 30 pages.
Yeah.
And this is the book. This is the hardcover. And
Yeah.
it's still for sale. There's a paperback version and an ebook as well.
And there'll be
But
a
many of
link
your
in the description for folks if they
Yeah,
want to buy
many of
it.
your
So,
audience will have read it or at least recognize it and know of it.
yeah.
Um, but the first chapter is essentially something I wrote between 2007 and 2015. 15 or thereabouts in bits. So I had like 20 pages already. And then if people would ask me when I started going to UFO conferences and seeking out researchers and trying to meet other abductees, I used to go to the United States quite a lot to the Steve Bassett's X conferences and so forth, and other events. Um, I um, had this narrative, and people would ask, what's your history? How did you work out that this was to do with you, and what's your thoughts on the abduction subject? And say, well, I've written, these 20 pages about it. If you want to, I'll just give you a copy of it, if you want to read it, and we can talk about it. So
Yeah.
that was the genesis of this book.
Hmm.
And I didn't write the rest of it until 2022, till 4 years ago.
Ah,
4 years ago this month,
yeah.
and I published it in September of that year. And the rest of it is um, testimonies of other abductees. 30 of them I interviewed, and they weren't all Americans or Brits. They were Germans and couple of Ghanaian people. Yeah, new
Yeah,
people
it
from Ghana.
does away
Couple
with
of
the
Chinese
whole
people. Yeah,
the
it's
notion that
global.
it's a
It's
Western
global.
thing. It's like, yeah, it's
No, it's
totally
not. It's
global.
global. It happens everywhere. It's
Yeah.
global. Yeah.
Now, one of the
Uh,
things that you give a lot of credit to is David Jacobs in terms of his
yeah.
conclusions.
Yeah.
But a couple of things I want to point out, though. When you say early in the book that the experiences that you're relating aren't recovered from hypnosis, that
Mm.
these are things that you were able to naturally recover from your own memories, that
Mm.
you have hypnotically recovered memories, but you didn't include them because you want this stuff to be sort of
Yeah,
defensible
but
as.
because there's a lot of misunderstanding about what hypnosis is for memory recovery. You basically do is you yourself
Mhm.
in time. Sorry about that.
It's okay.
That's my wife's phone ringing through the
Oh.
um, she fortunately answered it quickly. um, she so where was I trying to pick up the thread?
We were talking about David Jacobs and
Yeah, yeah, memory recovery. Um,
yeah, hypnosis.
what the abductors actually do is they stare at one of your eyes from that far away, and they twist their head around, which I actually remember this happening to me. Twist their head around, and you're lying on a table, and they move around you, and they
Hmm.
lean over you, and they get their eye right up against you, and as they twist, you suddenly feel something kind of shock, warm shock through your body, and you feel there's somebody in your mind, and giving you thoughts and suggestions, and all sorts of things kind of race into your consciousness. It's like seeing a movie that's run really fast.
Yeah,
It's on a TV or something.
like a
And
download kind of. I
yeah,
mean,
they have they somehow have the ability. I think it's either they have genetically engineered it into themselves, or it has been engineered into them, you know, by those who control this
yeah.
uh, thing. They have the ability of somehow putting the experience of the last 2 hours you've been undergoing the abduction examination and procedures. They have the ability for putting that into your long-term memory.
Hmm.
So when you get back, you find yourself in the car again, or in the living room again, or wherever they took you from, because they nearly always put you back exactly where they found you, but not always, but nearly always. When that you all you have is the sense of missing time, which is, it was 7 o'clock in the evening, and you were driving, and you saw a very bright light in the sky, and you pulled over to the side of the road. People always say, so we pulled over to the side of the road to get a better look at it. And it was really bright, and it got bigger and bigger. And suddenly we noticed it was 2 hours later, and we felt really strange. And something weird happened that night. We just can't understand it. We could never understand it. And but the time has just gone.
Yeah.
Now it's possible to get it back, but you have to practice and practice and practice accessing your long-term memory. And the whole idea of hypnotic regression is that a practitioner will try and guide you and help you to that, but you can do it on your own. You must learn how to do it, and it's quite hard to actually imagine. I mean, what I always say is if it's like something that happened when you were 3 years old. If you're 55, say,
Yeah.
you suddenly decide you want to remember something that happened when you're 3 years old. You've got a vague memory of that day, but you don't remember any details. And you dig it in your memory and dig in your memory and you dig in your memory and you dig in your memory. And finally, maybe after 4, 5, 6, 7 weeks, it, the experience is relived. You think, oh yeah, I've forgotten that completely. So it's in there. It's in your long-term memory, and they have the ability of putting the abduction experience which you're undergoing into your long-term memory, but by this optical engagement thing. Um, we
It's
have a
so insane.
section on this in our new book, which I've written with Dr. Andreas Luck, who's um, a, um, a molecular biologist and a PhD molecular biologist and geneticist. And this book is not yet published, but it will be in the next 4 weeks. Um, we go into this a little bit in that book where we have divergent opinions about it. It's one of the things we don't agree on. But I think that my experience of memory is that they engage with the optic nerve through your eye. And Andreas has a slightly different take on what might be happening there, even though he's not. We're not sure whether he's an abductee or not, but he thinks he probably is because of his experiences. But the book is not
Yeah.
about that. It's about this other things, other
Yeah.
biological and genetic
It's so
things.
bizarre to me. It's like we're wrestling with these things that it's like there's technology involved, but there's also some sort of like consciousness element involved that we're
Mm,
only now becoming aware of. So
mm.
where does the line get drawn between what's consciousness manipulation and what's technological advancement? What's genetic engineering? It's so baffling to us because we don't know from which theater these innovations are coming from. So we can't really get an easy explanation for what we're encountering, you know? It's really bizarre.
That's an extremely proficient and perceptive explanation of this because um, it is a very complicated phenomenon and it just take you into new areas of consciousness that you might not have considered you need to encounter when you started looking into this. But without those extra dimensions, you don't really understand this thing. And I don't think anybody really understands it. People understand different aspects of it, different facets of it, or see it from different angles, depending on their natural predisposition to be, consciousness, how woo-woo they can be, or how psychological, is their thinking, or how hard-nosed scientific, or how, really common sense. And people come at this thing with all sorts of perspectives, and they emphasize different aspects of the phenomenon depending on their character, their personality, and experience. But it's all the same thing underneath. It's just
Yeah,
that they see things in slightly different ways. But
yeah,
there's so many common strands to it. You can actually draw some conclusions um,
yeah.
based on multiple abductee testimony and based
Well,
on
I'd like to get
physical
into
evidence.
some of what your
Yeah,
conclusions are now, and I'd like to. There's interesting counterpoint because I've interviewed folks like Ray Hernandez. Are you familiar with Ray?
unfortunately not. No.
Okay, well, he
Who's Ray?
was an experiencer from Florida, and he went on to work with Edgar Mitchell to do this free
Oh,
study, which looked into
oh yes.
experiencers and how it relates to.
I actually do know of that. Yeah, yeah.
Okay,
I didn't realize Ray Fernandez was to do. Yeah.
yeah, but what's interesting about it is that they basically break down a whole, the UFO experience, including abductions and everything else, and but they include in that as, very similar NDEs and other types of spiritual epiphanies. They kind of put it all under one rubric and say that those are brushing up against the transcendental realm, I guess you could call it, like sort of the other space, right? Like that we've constantly been encountering as human beings throughout our history, and that each of these events is a way to spiritualize sort of the human experiencer. Um,
There's a lot in that. But I don't know how much. I know a lot of abductees don't think that way, but
yeah.
they have the same experiences. Maybe they don't appreciate things from that particular perspective. But I think that's interesting. I met Edgar Mitchell, by the way,
Oh, you did?
before he died. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I
Wow.
was
Cool.
chatting to him for about half an hour. He was selling books in at a conference where he'd been speaking. I was
Yeah.
chatting to him for about half an hour.
Living
Um,
history, that guy. I mean, he's
mm.
responsible for so much of
he's
this.
he's he's an extremely intelligent man.
Oh, yeah.
Extremely perceptive.
Yeah. And all sorts of ways, because not only was he, I mean, he was a science guy because he was an astronaut and had all that background, but then he was also, got a cracked
Yeah,
open mystic at the end, which is
yeah.
absolutely
Absolutely, yeah. There's a
lovely.
very, very strong streak of mysticism run through him. I remember him telling me when they were coming back from the moon and he was looking at the Earth. So they got closer and closer to it, and the fabulous sense of oneness he felt with the universe and the the smallness of the Earth in relation to the universe and how we were part of an ecology and we don't normally stretch our minds outside our day-to-day concerns. And he's much more eloquent than I in the way
Oh,
he
yeah.
explained it.
Yeah.
But he was great. He was great to talk to.
Yeah. My question to you is the hybridization program. To you, according to the sort of the last chapter of
Mhm.
your book, you talk a little bit about
Mm,
what the goals might be and what that looks like, and then also a little bit of the different morphologies of races that have been seen.
yeah.
Do you want to talk a little bit about that? I mean, basically, like there's the
Mm,
grays, there's tall grays, there's also
mm,
like mantid type beings who seem to be in charge
yeah.
of the grays, and then you had a really
Yeah.
interesting take on the draconian lizard
Mm,
kinds of aliens that maybe they were an example of a previous
mm,
hybridization program. But if you could
maybe.
explain that a little bit, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, there's the gray aliens are the aliens as far in cartoons and greetings cards and on TV and South
Yeah.
Park with the gray aliens the skinny morphology with no room in the chest area for lungs and so forth, which and they have huge heads relative to um, the the image on the front of Whitley's Communion book, 1987 book Communion, is very striking in that there's something visceral about it, which is arresting. It's not, according to abductees I've talked to, and according to my recollections, it's not completely accurate, but the effect it has on you and its presence coming off a page is so powerful that a lot of people who read that book and it was hit the bookshops in 1987, which is a long time ago, nearly 40 years now.
Yeah.
Um,
Wow.
is it no, yes,
Yeah.
39 years. Um, the effect with people is so profound that lots of people, not just me, but many people I spoke to at the time who were reading it around that time, said they couldn't have it on the bedside stand facing upwards. They'd have to put it down, facing downwards, with the image downwards, because it was so disturbing.
Yeah.
So that tells you how viscerally real it is. It's a lot more real than some Hollywood creation of a monster.
Yeah.
It's much more visceral.
Yeah. Deep
And
within the consciousness of the recipient. It's like you're remembering something subconsciously of memories that maybe you've suppressed. And yeah, I've heard that story a lot where people have seen that
so
picture and they're just like triggered, hugely.
yeah, so what abductees describe and what I remember is that there's one tall one
Hmm.
who's usually about human height, maybe 5 feet or 5'6", and there's exactly the same morphology. They're scrawny. Their heads are a little bit bigger because but they're all the same morphology. And there's the shorter ones who are about not they're half the size. They're maybe 3 feet tall, maybe 2 foot 10 or something like that, 3 feet, and they're really tiny. And those guys do all the grunt work. They collect you from, the house or the car or wherever they decide to pick you up, and they support you by some kind of levitation. And often the abductees describe being taken up a blue beam, which is being coming from the UFO, and they do the elementary medical examination on you. A lot of abductees describe this. Um, and I list things. I list the medical examination in chapter 4, what it includes and what it excludes. Surprisingly, there's nothing to do with cardiovascular system or the lymphatic system or the kidneys or the liver. All these organs are neglected, and they have no interest in them. What they're interested in is the reproductive organs and the spine and the central nervous system, particularly, and also rather surprisingly, the skin, which seems odd. It seems at variance with, but they're the things that really grab their attention, and the things they work on and look at, and the rest of the abdominal organs like the pancreas and the liver and so forth. No interest at all in
Yeah,
those. So
fascinating.
the little three little greys usually do that examination from you of you, and the tall ones do all the more intensive work like over harvesting and sperm collection, and they do the mind scan procedures and so forth. So they have got a different function. They've got a kind of higher function, a more sort of managerial function, if you like, with the scientists of the program. And then there's these reptilians, which I have no memory of, but many abductees describe them to me.
Yeah,
And I quote something in the final chapter, an incident which there's an abductee called Farah Yudozu. Some of your
yeah,
audience may
yeah.
know her. Did you ever meet her?
No, I haven't. I saw your picture in the book, and I was just remember you mentioning her in the
Yeah,
book.
she's a
She's a psychic,
fantastic woman.
right?
She's
Yeah,
back in. She lived in New Jersey, Hoboken, really near New York City for 15 years, but she's back in Istanbul now. Has been back in Turkey for several years,
yeah,
and she recounts in one of her books the story of her I think it's a great grandfather, um, who was called Emin Refik, when these two reptilians visited him in the middle of the night in the 1890s. Uh, and when he was a young teacher at Istanbul University, and they were with him for several hours, and they were trying to get into his mind, and he was paralyzed, and one was stood at the foot of the bed and the other at the head, large reptilian-like creatures, and they communicated only telepathically, and they had some um, control over his bodily systems. And she tells this story exactly as this has come down through the family, because she didn't know him, because she was born too late to know him. But this story, in its detail, its forensic detail, when you pull it apart, says that these creatures were doing the job of the grey aliens in the 1890s.
yeah,
And that's where these reptilians fit in, and it tells you a lot about what might be the program and might be the history of the program. So we don't have time to go into that now, but it's a very interesting story. It does fit all the facts and all the
yeah,
evidence I've been able to accumulate, and it might not be correct, but it damn well looks right to me.
yeah.
um, and there's other creatures, these mantis-like creatures, which are like praying mantises. They're really skinny, like big insects, and they have the most powerful mental control. And when one of them is in the room, in it during an abduction event, this is all your mind can perceive. Is
Yeah.
so the mind presence is so powerful, and they can be quite chatty with abductees and talk to them for hours and hours. They're very quick mentally, but there's no everything else basically fades into the background when one of these mantis creatures is around, and they're very stick-like. The bodies are very stick-like, even more so than the grey aliens, but they're very insect-like, and they have a forward stoop, and they have very big kind of insect-like appendages on the end of their arms, and they have these big eyes, like like the greys do. They have these big eyes, and I speculate that the grey aliens are genetically engineered into existence by these creatures, who are very extremely sophisticated genetic scientists. And I don't know how old their civilization is, but they're not recent. They have enormous amounts of control over the bodily and mind systems of humans when they're within range, and they
Yeah.
can do what they like with you. And there's them, and there's also what are commonly referred to in the literature as hybrids. And Whitley's probably talked to you a lot about hybrids, because he certainly
Yeah.
talks a lot to me about them.
Yeah.
Um, in our new book, Investigating the Impossible, we have a chapter on that called Chapter 3, which in which we explore hybridization and whether it's biologically and genetically possible, and if so, how it could be done, because the genetic barriers to it are very, very considerable. And we think that probably many of the projects have failed when the aliens have attempted to do this.
Well, which is
And
described in the experiences of abductees, because you had, like, for a
yeah,
while there seemed like there was a generation of non-thriving offspring
yeah,
who didn't
yeah,
seem like they were going to
exactly,
make it, and then they started to sort of get
exactly.
stronger, and now they
Yeah,
come to dominate some experiences, it seems like.
yeah, and at one stage in the abduction program in the 1980s, maybe through the 70s, 80s, and 90s, um, female abductees were impregnated with a fertilized zygote in their uterus, and the ovum was almost certainly their ovum, which is harvested from a needle,
Hmm.
pushed into the ovary through the abdomen. And this zygote is just gestated for about 10 weeks, and then during another abduction event, it's removed, and the child was then brought to term in a tank of nutrient fluid. Sounds like some science fiction thing, but so many abductees report this, that they they found they were pregnant, and they had positive pregnancy tests, and they went to the OB/GYN practitioner, and she confirmed that the abductees were pregnant, and then one day they were just not pregnant. They're just gone. There was no sign of termination, no expulsion, no blood, nothing. They're just gone, and hormone levels returned to normal, and were not pregnant. Mysteriously, it just vanished.
Yeah.
And loads of abductees has said this to me over the
Yeah.
years. So this was part of the program, was that these children were gestated in female abductees, and they were then removed. And I think that phase of the program, it was they found out that for whatever reason, um, I again, Andreas, Luke, and I have different perspectives on this, but that's probably a bit too deep to go into, during this interview. But
Yeah.
for whatever reason, they stopped that part of the program. That phase of the program, which probably lasted at least 25 years, is now over, and they don't do that anymore. And that we're into a new phase, and that's why alien abductions, as such, are fewer in number than they used to be. They've not ended, but they're fewer in number. I mean, I had two experiences in the past 2 or 3 years, which is pretty damn recent,
Yeah.
and I remember grey aliens, and one time I woke up with a triangle of incisions on this part of my hand at 2 o'clock in the morning, and they were bleeding. I woke up, and they were wet, and I got out of bed, very very carefully, so I didn't wake my wife, because she's a very light sleeper. I went into the kitchen and turned the light on, see for what is that, and there's these three incisions, like needle incisions, on the hand. So that happened maybe 2 years ago in October, from last October. So that's recent, and I remembered the gray aliens were there.
Yeah.
So they're still a thing. They're still around, but they're fewer in number, and their activities are more specialized. And so the program has changed, and I think what's referred to as hybrids in the literature. In fact, these creatures are not really hybrids. With a hybrid creature, hybrid is something like a mule, which is
Hmm.
50%, visibly 50% horse and visibly
Yeah.
50% donkey.
Yeah.
And these human alien hybrids are 100% human looking. So Andreas has proposed that they are probably not hybrid beings. They are transgenic, which is something different.
Yeah.
And that enables a few genes to be inserted into the zygote at a very early stage, which gives that human special qualities, special characteristics, special abilities, and also makes them fiercely loyal to the alien program. And we suspect that we got a whole chapter of 60, 70 pages in the book about this process.
Yeah.
It is very quite heavy on molecular biology and
The
genetics,
science.
but
Yeah. No.
we do explain everything with diagrams, and we simplify things as much as possible to people who are not degree qualified in genetic science. One of those people would be me, because I'm not qualified in genetic science at degree level to
Yeah.
PhD level, but Andreas is, and
Yeah.
this makes very fascinating reading.
Yeah, and I mean, it makes you wonder if that they had this breeding program and it turned into sort of the transgenic part of it turned into the answer for getting what they wanted out of the program. If that's done, what was the point and where are we headed next? I mean, that's always
That's
I
a
mean,
very good question. I can't answer it. We can only
who
speculate.
can, right? Maybe Donald
Um,
Trump.
I mean, it's very important that uh, to appreciate that the abductors have experimented with these different things with in their program. They've put the human race through. They haven't come here with knowing exactly 100% what they're going to do in the 20, 30, 40 years, but they have then an outline of the program. But they have discovered they can't do this, or they can't do this very well, so they've decided to do that, and they've changed this and adjusted that and made little adjustments to this, and the program is not what maybe they originally forecast would to be exactly, but they're after a certain result,
Mhm.
and the result does seem to be the integration of humans with into our society at all in different levels. It probably takes a few generations,
Yeah.
that have special abilities and special understandings about what's going on.
Infiltration for
Pretty
whatever.
scary.
Yeah, that's
I mean,
exactly right.
it's kind of it invites incredulity when you talk
Yeah.
about this, but
Yeah.
you have to have experienced this program firsthand to take on board that it's actually happening. There's not something, I've imagined and millions of other people have imagined. They've gone through it
Yeah.
and been engaged by this program at one level or another. And these people are not lying. They're not deceived. They don't want to be part of this thing, but they've ended up as part of it,
Yeah.
of
It's
their whole
interesting.
lives. Mm.
One of the things I appreciated about your book, you were talking about, which is a distinction I think that has to get made, that there's um, a lot going on within our culture right now in terms of like populist ideology and talk shows and all this stuff where the value of the truth has been degraded because there's all kinds of noise out there. And the problem I have as a journalist who got drawn into this subject is that this UFO topic is often tarred with that brush. Like this is all part of that sort of right-wing noise machine that's trying to distract people from the politics of the moment and get them off into la la land so they're more easily manipulable. That's not what this
Mm,
is.
mm, mm.
This is deeper than that. But people just want to reject it because they want to lump it with the QAnon slash
Yeah.
Pizzagate kinds of conspiracies, and that's a real sticky wicket right now. Trying to
Um,
navigate all that, you know.
it's covert, the whole thing is it's extremely it's enormous, this program, and but it's extremely covert, and their technology is so sophisticated and they're so careful with things that it's only with occasional mistakes, like the Travis Walton case as an example,
Yeah,
and where and the witness case on the Brooklyn Bridge abduction in 1989. These
yeah,
rare cases where independent witnesses see what's going on. In the Travis Walton case, of course, there were 7 guys in the truck, and 6 of them watched Travis being abducted.
yeah,
And in the Brooklyn Bridge case, there were well, Bud Hopkins actually was contacted by 23 separate people who didn't know each other over the months and years, and who gave testimony. And I've seen a lot of those correspondence, that correspondence, a lot of those letters in Bud's archives. I've
yeah,
actually read them. So uh, occasionally, I don't know whether they're deliberate mistakes, or whether they just don't care if people see them or not.
yeah.
Um,
That seems to happen.
Travis, as an example, had no interest in the alien abduction, even UFOs or anything like that at all, before his 1975 incident, and he had no interest in it afterwards. He just wanted to get back to his life and adjust to the what had happened to him. He didn't want to talk to anybody about it. But of course, the world descended on Snowflake, Arizona, because it became a huge media circus, and simply because it had been witnessed by so many people who all passed polygraph tests and so forth, and had consistent stories for years and years and years, and they all suffered as a consequence. Nobody made any money out of it. On the contrary. So when these things are witnessed, the events are witnessed. These are gives a rare glimpse, insight into what a craft look like, and what how it works and what really happens. But 99.9% of the time, abductions are not seen.
Yeah,
People are missed. People are noticed to be absent, especially children who go missing from a home. Sometimes they're abducted with their mothers or their fathers, depending on which line the,
family
the
line.
aliens are following. But
Yeah,
they disappear. And I know a guy in Northern England, who was found himself in the garden of his home in the winter, in the cold, locks out of the family home on 2 occasions when he was a kid, like 3 years apart. On 2 occasions, he had to knock, try and get back in, and in the end, he had to knock, wouldn't ring the doorbell or whatever, to get somebody to wake up and let him in. And nobody could understand how he got out, and he couldn't explain it because he didn't know. But these anomalies happen sometimes, and
yeah,
that tells you that something odd is going on, and they're all part of a pattern. But this we're talking about less than 1% of incidents are actually noticed in this way,
yeah.
and then of course you've got all the physical evidence, the bodily scarring, which I
Go
make
into.
quite a big deal of in Out of Time, and
Yeah,
the implants
implants and
which
scoop marks
which
and
you know
yeah,
which I had the scoop mark and analyzed at a dermatological laboratory in Manhattan, by Joel Casimir and his team in 2008, and I had some hairs we found after an abduction event, in our house in 2015, in our house in Hertfordshire, and I had those analyzed by Microtrace LLC in Illinois. Somebody arranged to pay for that for us. I can't reveal who it was because he wants to remain anonymous, but it's a fairly well-known scientist. So all this forensic provable evidence is something that have been very careful to go into in quite a lot of detail and record. And because I think that physical evidence is much more difficult to deny than what somebody remembers or
Yeah.
claims they remember. It's that can be dismissed very easily. But something like a lab report of hairs and a lab report of a scoop mark scar, they're much more difficult to dismiss. When it's from the clinic on had a note paper explaining what exactly they found. So I've always lain very heavy emphasis on those things.
Yeah. Well, that's the difference between this book and a lot of just abduction confessional kinds of stories, which are always
Yeah.
to me really compelling and fascinating. But you're making
Mm.
an argument, and a solid one, which makes your book, I think, for me at least, raises it above so much of what is out there, as an important contribution to the literature
Thank you, James.
on this subject.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's still selling after 4 years. It's still selling. Um,
Yeah.
this is though that attitude is a fundamental thing behind this
New book. Yep.
Andreas look and my co-authoring this book, which is all about the application of the scientific method, genetic science, molecular biology, and so forth, to look at these mysteries like the Nazca mummies and the Curie case and hybridization and so forth. And it's absolutely rock hard science, really. It's very
Yeah.
difficult to debunk it
Yeah.
as a fantasy. It's very solid.
Yeah. There's
So
stuff.
I was very happy to work with Andreas on this, and he obviously cooperated with me very closely. So
Yeah.
it's a joint effort. You'd like to talk to Andreas and me together at some point. About this
Absolutely. I would
because
love to.
it's a very different angle. It's from the same philosophical scientific route and
Yeah.
same mindset, but it's a very different set of investigations and very
Yeah.
different methodology. Yeah.
And you shared with me a PDF, and I read through the book.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
I loved it, and I think that I would
If you got
absolutely
through
love to
all of
have
it,
you.
that's fantastic. We thought it would be a bit too much of a challenge for some people, but obviously not you.
Well, I mean,
So,
some of the things that were sort of outside the main, like when you started talking about the disinformation and stuff, that was right up my alley. So it all tied together
yeah,
nicely for me because I cover this and I get
right.
so much of what you're
Mm.
arguing. That's pretty much all I
Yeah.
had for you. We're at 11:11, so that sounds like a perfect time to wrap it up.
Okay. Okay, James.
Um, thank you
Thank you
so
so
much.
much.
Yeah, I
Yeah, thank
will.
you for the opportunity for me to rattle on for minutes on end.
Yeah, well, and thank you
Hope it
for
was
telling your
interesting. And,
story.
and
It
yeah,
was.
thank you.
And thank you for helping to enlighten people to the reality of all this, and keeping it's not all just cosmic mystical fantasy. There's a lot of stuff going on that's really important, and people need to be aware that there's
Yeah. Yeah,
potentially,
there's science behind there, behind
yeah,
it all. There's something
yeah.
real behind it.